been a long time with WRDA, and I started as a staff member, as the director, and it was my first time into the women's sector, so it was quite a, stepping into that was new for me. So from that point of view, it took a lot of time to find out about the organisation and the wider women's sector, and I think that was really where things began to sort of make sense as to the role of the women's sector and how important it is within Northern Ireland and wider. I then, when I left WRDA, I didn't want to lose contact with the organisation, and that's when I went on the board of WRDA as a board member to begin with, and then as chair. So it feels like I've been involved with WRDA for many, many years. Time has flown by, but it has been a real joy to be part of the organisation through its ups and downs over the years, really.
Tell us a bit about your own journey as a feminist.
Well, I came to it late, I would have to say. It wasn't something that I really had any consciousness around. I mean, I knew instinctively around the whole area of gender inequality and broader equality, because my background in the voluntary community sector opened my eyes to that, and then being on the Equality Commission very much brought into sharp focus the whole issue, particularly of inequality and all the equality grounds. It took me to come to WRDA to really understand the need to have a feminist perspective on things, and I suppose I learnt from the people you're going to be talking to as part of the 40 years anniversary. They educated me, informed me, and gave me a really good grounding in feminism and the importance of it, and I haven't looked back since. And it took that experience and it took that opportunity for me to really get it, and I've been very grateful, particularly to fellow board members and directors who really give me a strong sense of how important it is we're good stewards and guardians of WRDA with that feminist perspective, and how important it is that we remain. That is a big central plank of who WRDA is and its identity and its DNA, and it's very important it stays that way.
How do you feel then that the feminist movement in Northern Ireland has changed over the course of WRDA's lifetime, over the last 40 years?
Feminism isn't linear, it really isn't, and in terms of the issues to do with feminism, they would ebb and flow, being given greater visibility and then stronger in policy terms, and then it's become, I think, a stronger movement overall, not just within WRDA, but some of the big issues that have brought feminism out of the cold a bit into more mainstream, I think, has been the Me Too movement and some of the big structural inequalities that have begun to sort of emerge and have taken its toll. I mean, you only have to look at COVID and the impact. You look at the cost of living, even in more recent times, and then, of course, the impact of the Troubles when you look back about the sort of more hidden aspects of gender inequality and feminism that sort of were around but weren't given their place within a society that was not at ease with itself during our Troubles. So I always think organisations like WRDA, if they weren't there, you would have to invent them. You would have to invent the organisation to be able to hold that feminist space and be good stewards and guardians of that space.
Thank you. Just to go back to something that you've sort of already touched on there, to talk a bit more about the impact of the Troubles on the Women's Resource and Development Agency and the women's movement here generally.
I think for me, the big light bulb moment to demonstrate how important women were in the conflict was the women's centres. WRDA has had a relationship with the women's centres through partnership for quite some time. There were members of the women's centre at one stage on the board. We still have that, thankfully, but there was much more visibility around the women's centres, and I think their role in communities really stood the test of time. They were there when women had no safe spaces just as much. They could come together. They held themselves in the community well and built up the respect of those communities, and it had to be a safe space at times. The other thing that struck a chord around the Troubles was how important that women's voices were heard, and I think again WRDA and others made very sure that women's voices had a place at the table. It didn't always go according to plan, but as I've said, they were there, they remained there, they were focused, and they made sure that those voices were heard either through meetings, policy discussions, papers, proposals, all of the hard work that's involved in terms of policy and influencing change in tough times.
Thank you. How does WRDA approach building the capacity of the women's sector?
To me, two things. Really, it's about the Community Facilitators Programme. I really do think that is one of the mainstays of WRDA. It's how it came into being, is with education, how important education is, community education in particular. I think at the time of WRDA, community education wasn't fully understood and didn't have its place. And I think WRDA has track record around the need for community education as a step up, as a way of supporting women to have a better footing in terms of opportunity, in terms of employment, in terms of a sense of who they are and self-esteem and confidence building. Those qualities that were built in to the Community Facilitator Programme, it is a real measure of success in my view that the Community Facilitator Programme has continued to survive and indeed thrive.
One of the duties of the Management Committee is to provide good governance for the Women's Resource and Development Agency. What does good governance mean for a feminist organisation?
Good governance is good of itself. It has to be in place, irrespective of the organisation. It brings probably a sharper understanding of governance when it comes to protecting and stewarding the need to maintain ourselves as a feminist organisation. But governance for me is about organisations like WRDA showing to funders, to policymakers, to the public and to their members that the organisation is extremely well run, and that the organisation, through its management board and the way that it exercises itself as a management board, that people can trust us and have confidence in us and as an organisation. And that's why WRDA has needed to work hard on that. A big part of it from a feminist perspective is to have very progressive and very women-friendly policies and practice in terms of childcare, in terms of leave, in terms of work-life balance, in terms of those sorts of areas, to make sure that our policies are of a high standard so that they can be used not just by WRDA but send out a loud message to other organisations. That's what an organisation that's focused on from a feminist perspective does. It's also important from a governance point of view that there is a good finance and funding in place. You will not survive as an organisation without attention to your finances and looking after your finances, because the public, we have responsibilities through the Charity Commission as employers around health and safety. Those can be things that can feel laboured. They don't add, they're not exciting at times, but they're absolutely the building blocks for an effective and efficient organisation, and they need to be in place, and it is up to the board to provide that confidence around good governance. And I think WRDA, has set a standard in the women's sector, certainly over the years, and the colleagues I've worked with, the importance of good governance. Good governance is good practice, and make sure that the organisation is run well for funders, for partners, but also for the staff, staff have to feel that they're working for an organisation with a very open, transparent culture. So a board is there to create a culture that is welcoming and warm, not always dealing with easy things. Tough things can happen, and a board or the staff need to know that the board will take good decisions, tough decisions, but fair decisions in relation to the running of the organisation and the support of staff. It's quite a long-winded answer there for you.
Well, there's no quick answers to the good governance, so thank you for that. I think that was a very full answer. You've maybe already touched on this in your previous answer, but I was just thinking, whenever I was reading over your various annual reports whenever you were chair, that there's been very difficult times financially for WRDA and for the women's sector generally. And I was just wondering if you could talk about how good governance contributed to WRDA, not just our survival but our flourishing even through those difficult times.
And that's a really good question, Megan, because the women's sector and its survival versus its sustainability has been a running thread throughout WRDA's history. There's no doubt about that. And what you do in circumstances like this is it was incumbent on us as a board to work together. We had to make sure that the decisions we made, we had to make sure that the resources that we had did well for women in the community. And there were times, for example, we needed good communication with staff if funding was extremely fragile. So from that point of view, there has been decisions in the past where we've had to downsize in terms of staff. We've had to rethink working hours for staff because we completely understand that the impact on staff, and our duty of care is to make sure we understand our business well and that the decisions we make are good decisions to the best of our ability, to communicate them, to be transparent and to consult with staff. And it's similar with funders. If funders have any sense of the risks associated with running the organisation, if there's risks around finance, that affects your reputation, it affects your credibility, it affects your standing. So we as a board there have been occasions where we've maybe had to say no, simply say no, we can't take anything on. We want full recovery. You can't just reduce costs and things like that. And we've had to adjust our programs, adjust our work. So it takes a good, strong board, a diverse board with different skills to really talk with each other and make sure that the decisions we make are collective decisions. The board or the management committee of WRDA works not as a democracy. It can't be a democracy when it comes to governance, but it does work as a collective insofar as I don't think in my whole chair's career I had to exercise a chair's vote. There was always consensus and collective, even through the toughest times, and that is the measure of a good board. And we've had some tough staffing issues to deal with, and I think that's where the resilience and strength of the board really come into their own. It's good to govern when things are going well. It is extremely hard to govern when things aren't going well, and that is the measure of the trust of a trust board or a management board, whatever we call ourselves, is to build a certain solidarity and trust, particularly when things aren't going so well. And I think where we are now has proved that journey has worked.
You were talking there a little bit about the diversity of the management committee in terms of its skill set. I was wondering if you could expand on how WRDA ensures that our management committee accurately reflects the diversity of the women's movement.
I think over the last few years we've given that a bit more thought, genuinely given that a bit more thought, because WRDA was very keen to increase its diversity, And I think some of the building blocks for that were a survey where we surveyed the members. I mean, as the membership grown and developed, we needed to start reflecting our membership. So I think one of the most significant things we did was to do that survey and reach out to the membership and put energy and effort in to try to diverse our members, diverse the board, the management board. And some of the areas are just to increase the number of young people coming through. You know, the women in the women's sector I've known a long time. We're all getting to a certain age, if I may say so. And I think what we need to do is to make sure that there's great diversity, certainly in terms of younger women. There's also, obviously, in reflecting the broader diversity of LGBT, of women with disability, and we were also keen to strengthen the political, you know, make sure that we reflected the society that we live in a political sense as well. So I do think effort and energy has gone in. It isn't easy to attract members to the board. It's something we have to do, you know, year in and year out. The last few years we have attracted particularly really talented young women coming through, but it has ebbed and flowed more in the last few years. And I think it's something we have to keep working at, and working hard to make sure that we do have that diversity.
Thank you, Anne. Yes, it's definitely a major commitment being a member of a management committee, and at times it's not an easy role. And of course all the management committee members are volunteers, so it's a lot to ask of people. So thank you all for doing the job so well. Talking then about how does a diverse management committee contribute to WRDA's good governance?
Well, when we look particularly policy areas, it's, you know, some of the policy areas, I mean, recently we had a really, really good discussion on the maternity policy that we had, and it really struck me because we had recently on the board, you know, women who, single parents, so, you know, they added a real richness to the discussion, and there are those were the examples. There's others where we had the discussion, the much more sensitive, difficult discussion of decriminalisation of sex workers. I think that was probably the most challenging management board discussion we had, because it was very clear from the discussion and the debate in the room, a healthy discussion and a healthy debate, that though there were different voices with different views, and that's what's rich about it. If we all thought the same, I don't think that makes for good governance. What makes for good governance to me is to take an issue and to hear different voices, challenged voices, and what happens then? You end up with coming out with something that is much better. It stands up to scrutiny, stands up to the test of time, because internally we have really thought through the implications of some of the policies. So I suppose that to me is where a diverse board comes into its own, because we can be dealing, the other one was reproductive rights. I mean, that would have been something that's been settled in WRDA for quite some time, and I remember when it was something that, you know, not a bit way back now, it was something that we had to navigate our way through as well. So a board that takes tough decisions, allows different voices and different views, and makes sure that all voices are heard, and that where corporate governance comes into play, and it's extremely important for me, is once we've had the discussion, once we've had the debate, once we've agreed the policy, we all are responsible as a corporate trust board to stand over that policy. You do not go out and then complain or have debates about it because we have gone through a good process where the policy has come out as the corporate policy of WRDA, and we have a duty to stand over that, even if we disagree with it as an individual. So I suppose for me that brings sometimes the dry subject of governance to life. It's about real life at times and what we do when we're up against some of those tougher issues.
Thank you, and yes, it's about the board, I suppose, operating with sort of collective responsibility rather than individual outlooks.
And you can have both. I mean, you can still have your individual views, whether on, you know, reproductive rights or the decriminalisation of sex, whatever. You can retain those individual views, but it's the collective consensus that comes from a good process that produces good policy, in my mind, and that becomes the policy that WRDA stands over as an organisation.
Thank you. So just we're talking there about good governance. Stormont has been suspended for about 35% of its existence since 1998. I was just wondering if you could talk about what impact this lack of good governance at a devolved level has had on the Women's Resource and Development Agency and the women's movement here generally.
I think what has happened here is stark evidence of not so much the impact on WRDA and the wider women's sector, but the impact on women and families per se. You know, when you look back, I mean, you only have to look in recent history around COVID, the cost of living, all of the issues to do with that, the reduction in health service, its women's role as carers in health and social care has shot through the roof in these last 10 years, and the policies are not sort of coming into play. The slow progress on domestic and sexual violence, the sort of stop-start approach to the gender equality strategy. It is really it's so hard to accept that we've had such a dormant, silence around some of the important work that would be the bread and butter of WRDA in terms of its policy role and influencing role, and it can act as that barrier to take some of that policy and influencing role forward. But at the same time, what has really struck me is WRDA and the wider women's sector, the Women's Policy Group in particular, haven't stood and sat on their laurels. They have kept going, producing women's manifestos over and over, making the case into the politicians, even though they're not in play, if you like. But and I think that's where the women's sector really has such a strength in that it has never given up. It hasn't given up. It remains resilient and it remains strong. And I think, as I've said before, if there wasn't a WRDA, you would have to have one, so that somebody is the guardian and the keeper of some of those important issues that you know, and we've got to keep knocking on the door in relation to that. But it is tough. It is tough. But WRDA and the Women's Policy Group, I know, and some of the individuals in that haven't given up, but can't become hopeless. We just can't. We have to try to remain hopeful.
Yes, hope's very important in those kind of situations.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. Just to go back then and sort of pick up on something that you mentioned during that answer was the role women played during the COVID-19 pandemic, and the kind of lack of support there. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about the Women's Resource and Development Agency's response to the pandemic, because I think as a member of staff experiencing it, that we were certainly one of the leaders in sort of good practice there.
And again, you would have to pay tribute to Anne McVicker and her leadership around all of this, because she was like, governance and leadership are interdependent in some ways, insofar as is that Anne McVicker had her finger on the pulse. She was picking up in the community and within the organisation and broader women's sector that we needed to find a way of what do we do? How do we as a management board exercise good care and responsibility for the staff team? And that's where on every management board meeting there was COVID-19 was on the agenda in terms of what were the best policies for us to look at. How do you make this building safe? How do you have good flexible working from home, putting the technology that runs in, even think, what is the technology that enables people to stay at home? How do you create conditions for our staff to be able to remain and work from home? And that was a constant. So it was a constant, real-time, real-life governance in action, where we discussed that at every management board meeting, what was working, what wasn't, what needed to change. And then gradually, it's like the risks associated with our responsibilities for staff. When do you return to the office? Is it a blended approach? Things like that there. So it was very heightened in all of the minds of the management board that we would make sure that our staff, and I suppose it's being aware of their emotional well-being, not just the physical or the practical side of it, but the emotional well-being, and times where people, Zoom people meeting online, whatever supports could be put in place to support particularly the staff at that time.
I was just wondering if you could talk a bit then about what you are most proud of from your time at WRDA so far, and what you feel is the organisation's greatest achievement.
Well, the most proud of, I think, it's got to be the Community Facilitators Programme. It really, really struck a chord when I came into the organisation, and it has continued year in and year out to attract women to become community facilitators, which is really good for women in terms of their confidence, their self-esteem, increasing their employability routes as well as self-employed. And not only that, that community facilitator programme has led to a series of programmes in terms of breast and cervical screening, for example, that make a difference out in communities. And from some of the information we get, it can save, and some of the work saves lives, and our work particularly with the Public Health Agency, and as we've evaluated, and that's something else that WRDA does well. Whatever it does, it evaluates it. And I think building that in to the work that we do, so that it doesn't get stale, it changes, it develops, it improves, it shifts as needed, but the essence of the Community Facilitator Programme has stayed the same, but it has grown, and the leadership throughout the years, we've had different ways of thinking about it, but it really has stood the test of time. Your question about WRDA's achievements, how would you measure that? WRDA commitment to partnership working. It's in the DNA of WRDA to have good partners, or to have partnerships as one of the mission of the organisation, and it's always been a key objective with any of our strategic plans, is partnership working. And that's not easy. There have been times when the relationships weren't at their best, and it wasn't easy to keep the door ajar or the door open around partnership working. We're at a very good stage in terms of partnership working now, and it is key to the survival and the sustainability of WRDA. You only have to look at the diversity of the income base that is WRDA. A lot of that is based on that hallmark of partnership, and I think it is through that that WRDA has gone on a journey from survival to sustainability through partnership. And if that is the one thing that will be my biggest memory, is to utilise partnership as a means of sustainability and staying with it. And I think it's its greatest achievement.
Thank you, Anne. Yes, we always work in partnership. I think every member of staff's work relates to a partnership in some way. I'm involved in the Women's Regional Consortium, for example. So yes, I think it's fair to say that is a cornerstone of our approach to work. Well, you'll see on the desk beside you there the Red Book, and it's the same Red Book that we've been using to record all of our AGMs since I think 1985. I was just wondering if you had any memories or any anecdotes about our 39 previous AGMs.
Do you know, when you asked me that question, Megan, I really couldn't think of anything. I suppose the AGMs are a good time for people to come together. Just the human relationships, the time to meet and to communicate. I think I happened to be, and I don't know what celebration it was, 20th, 25, 30, I don't know. But again, a lot of the previous directors of WRDA came together. And I think that's what's good about WRDA AGMs. It brings people in. It's a way to welcome people in who maybe you haven't seen year in and year out. So it has its place as a way, not just to sort of do the business, which you have to do, but it's an opportunity to communicate and connect with others. And obviously during COVID that didn't happen, so it's great that the AGMs are meeting in person. And we need to get the numbers up and make sure that people know they come and they're welcome, and it's a way and an opportunity to meet with others.
Thank you, Anne. So in November we will celebrate our 40th AGM. I'm just wondering if you have a message for people who will be attending. I know you'll be there yourself, but is there anything that you'd like to say ahead of time?
I would repeat, I think the ethos of partnership has been the journey of WRDA's journey from survival to sustainability. Do not give up on partnership and work hard at partnership. The women's sector is so small in the scheme of things. It can't afford not to work as a collective, all of the organisations. And when it does, it is a loud voice. So not just in terms of sustainability, but in terms of influencing and change. I think that is, to me, the hallmark is partnership. And wherever we can bring that to bear, we should.